All right, so let's get this party started. I'm going to actually start with you, John. Let's talk about our reasonable accommodations. What is a reasonable ADA accommodation?
Well, essentially it is any modification in program, practice, procedure that a business can accomplish for the benefit of the disabled consumer, customer, that would not cause or not pose an undue burden on that business. I think a lot of times some of the examples that get passed around in discussions about this online are, for instance, bed height in a hotel. You could remove the platform to lower the bed to make it more accessible to someone who uses a wheelchair. But I also think that there are a lot of accommodations that are needed because of barriers that exist that shouldn't exist. It's been mentioned, I think, a couple times at this conference, my experiences in hotel rooms with showers being inaccessible. I do fit the median standard of the ADA in that if a hotel room is ADA compliant, it will definitely work for me. But when 75–80% of hotel rooms are not ADA compliant, I now need an accommodation to overcome the barrier that shouldn't exist. And so that's also a reasonable accommodation, but it's not something that was intended ever to be needed. But yeah, just to summarize, sorry I'm very wordy, it's something that a person asks for that is not an undue burden on the business, that can improve the accessibility of the product, service, location, to make it more accessible to that individual. And I'll defer to the attorney next to me because she might be able to explain it a little better.
Awesome. Yes. Let's hear from you, Danica.
Hi, Danica. This is Danica once again. I probably should have introduced who I am besides just who I am as a person. I'm the Senior Advocacy Attorney at Paralyzed Veterans of America, or PVA. PVA is a membership organization of veterans with a spinal cord injury or disorder, which does often impact mobility. Most of our members do use a wheelchair or another mobility device. I don't want to scare people when you hear the word attorney. People failed to see the first part of my title, and that is advocacy. So at PVA, I work on anything related to federal disability rights laws. This would be the ADA, Air Carrier Access Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and we also collaborate with companies and entities to help them become more accessible. Was there a question you posed to me, John?
Well, I asked the question of what is a reasonable ADA accommodation. I think John did a really beautiful job, but we'd love if you have anything else to add to that.
Yes, so places of public accommodation, which essentially would be covered under Title III of the ADA. These are most of the private companies that are open to the public. These companies are required to modify policies, practices, procedures, enable a person with a disability to have full and equal enjoyment of their goods, services, or facilities. That is the reasonable modifications portion, but there is the general ADA, general provision, which is that you can't discriminate against a person with a disability. This would be to exclude them from your facility or your programs. It would also be giving the person with a disability a separate service or program that is not equal to what is offered to people without disabilities. And a lot of these can be accomplished if the company just doesn't say no.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the biggest thing, right? We have to stop looking at what we think we can't do and focus on how do we accomplish what we've set out to do? How do we accomplish what that person wants to achieve? And when you start looking at it with the attitude of achieving that final end and stop looking at it purely from the law or the barriers in front of you. If all you're looking at are the barriers, then you're not going to overcome them. But if you're looking for the way around them and how to achieve the goal, you're going to find a way. With that, let's kind of move on and talk. I want to hear, what is a reasonable accommodation for somebody who is deaf? Well, I don't know, checking into a hotel. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, but can you give us some examples?
I published an article about 3 months ago, and it was kind of a response to people asking about the accommodations. And I was saying you really have to become proactive to really provide the accessibility. When I wake up in the morning, I already know, I'm deaf, I have a full-time job, and at that moment when I start making phone calls, I want to be able to go to a restaurant to get food, lunch, whatever it is. I'm going to take a bus somewhere. It's exhausting because I have to do all the additional effort to make all of this happen. And I have to be able to communicate with people out in the world. So for me, I kind of have to think through, from a business perspective, what does full accessibility look like for a deaf and hard of hearing person? And also a way that can result in benefits for absolutely everyone.
Absolutely. I love what you said. You already know you're deaf. I already know I'm a wheelchair user. It's so funny to me when people tiptoe around those facts like this is some hidden secret that we don't realize. We've seen a mirror. We know where our legs don't work right. So it's always entertaining when people tiptoe around that, isn't it?
I was recently on the airplane the other day. I was flying here to San Francisco, and there was a little bit of turbulence. And I was watching a movie on my laptop, and there was an announcement that popped up. I mean, on the screen, all it said was, "There's an announcement." I don't know what the announcement was. It just tells me there is one. So I take out my phone, and I put a text to the person next to me, "What's the announcement?" And they're trying to look at me and figure out what's going on. They looked at me really weird, couldn't figure out what I was trying to text them. And so they handed it to their wife. And the wife started texting back and said, the pilot was just saying that we have, we're hitting turbulence. All I needed was I just needed a quick little summary there of what was happening. But I mean, it's just crazy. The airlines still haven't figured this out.
So
in 2024.
A reasonable accommodation for an airline could be making sure that the announcements are in subtitles on the screen. That seems like a very reasonable accommodation to me, and it doesn't exactly seem that hard. So.
Yeah, we've got the technology. That's what 360 direct video is doing. We have the captioning if individuals that need that. And it'd be great if the airlines would also include some of that in their own technology on the flights. Where you can watch the movies, you can also include this captioning as well.
Is everybody hearing everything that sounded quiet to me, but that could just be me. So give a thumbs up. Okay, good. Sorry, just double checking. John, tell us about a reasonable accommodation. Other one, we've heard the shower, and that what's one that you ask for that businesses may not even be forward thinking about it. I might be thinking of transportation to and from the airport on this one.
Sure. Well, I think first thing maybe I'd like to just add something, and that is that in order for a business to be aware of a reasonable accommodation request, they have to make space for the person, the individual, the customer, to make that request. And the reality is that a lot of disabled people, myself included sometimes, hesitate to feel like a burden on the business that they're doing business with, the person at the front desk of the hotel. I think that some of the best experiences that people have with travel are in environments where they are made to feel that their needs are not unimportant, but rather a priority for the business. And so occasionally, it doesn't happen very often at all, I have to say, but once in a while I'll check into a hotel and they'll say, check out your room. Let us know if there's anything that you need moved or adjusted to make it more comfortable for you. One time I was in a hotel in Singapore, and I came back to my room. I'd been there for a day, and it had been serviced by the housekeeping staff. And I found a note on the dresser or the desktop there, and it said, "I saw that you use a wheelchair, and I moved this chair out of the way so that you could access the desk. And, there's no ADA in Singapore. It certainly would have been a reasonable accommodation to request that some furniture be rearranged or moved in my hotel room. But, I hadn't asked for that. That was a proactive effort
I love
to
that.
make the space more accessible for me. And so I think it's just about trying to create an environment where people feel comfortable to speak up about what their needs are. And then once they do so, to make them understand that it's not a burden at all. And in fact, it's a pleasure. If we could adopt sort of the Chick-fil-A model of customer service, say thank you or make a request, and they say, it's my pleasure. In fact, I see some Marriott people over here, and they got rid of this button that used to be on the hotel room phones, and I'd love to encourage you to put it back. It was the delighted to serve button. Now, I'm not saying that they've changed their perspective on customer service or anything, but I loved that button, delighted to serve.
It
right?
just makes you want to push it, doesn't it?
It was very, yeah, exactly, it did. I used to, this was before my car accident and disability, but I traveled a lot even before then, and I would always make a big deal checking into a Marriott hotel. I'd tell my friends, "Oh, that button there, delighted to serve. You're delighted to serve."
So can we say that a reasonable accommodation is really just about great customer service?
Yeah, I think at its core, absolutely. That's my understanding.
I think that really sets it up. If you would care for another customer by taking personal needs, then why wouldn't you do the same for a wheelchair user? Why do we sometimes act like it's a burden to care for somebody who is using our services? It shouldn't be a burden. Now, with all of my clients, I do own a travel agency and I focus on families with disabilities. The thing, when I make their hotel reservation and follow up with them, I request that for those who might need it, the front desk escorts the clients to the room to do that room inspection. This is a way that they can check to make sure that the shower nozzle is all the way down, that the bed is at the right height, that there isn't any furniture blocking, and it's also an opportunity if somebody is blind, low vision, they can have the room described with the layout, say which one of the soaps is which, the conditioner, and it's a great way. This is an easy practice that you can do in your destination, in your hotels, where you have somebody with a disability escorted to their room to make sure that it's going to fit their needs, rather than sending them there and then finding out that the room doesn't work for them. So that's an easy way to be proactive on that.
I also want to let people know, I just want to give you an idea of what my morning looks like. So I get up in the morning and I'm going to need a towel. I don't want to have to go down to the front desk. I obviously can't make the phone call to the front desk requesting the towel. So now I've got to get out of bed. I've got to get fully dressed, put on my shirt, put on my pants, go to the elevator, all the way down, walk up to the front desk. All I need is a towel. Why isn't there a way that I can just go ahead and communicate with the front desk from my laptop? And if I'm ready to go, I'm going to call my Uber. Everybody, does anybody know Uber? Do you use Uber here? Okay. So the driver always gets a rating. And my rating isn't that high, is not that high with Uber. Do you know why? Because when I get in the Uber, they start talking to me. and they think I'm ignoring them. Therefore, they give me a bad rating. They think I'm being rude. You know, they might give me a 4 instead of a 5. So I get into the Uber and I sit down and they look at me and they're talking to me and I smile. Hey, yeah, sure. I just nod. I mean, it's an automatic response.
It'd be great to be able to note in our profiles on Uber.
Yes, definitely it would. You know, so they think I'm rude and I'm really not. That's just one example of kind of a travel experience. You know, I get up in the morning and there's just things you need when you first wake up. People want to come up and start talking to me and I can give you a thumbs up, smile, I can wave at you. I can give you 2 thumbs up too. Maybe even a fist bump, I don't know. You know, we can't have really in-depth conversation, but I am able to kind of get my point across.
Absolutely. Now, have you stayed at any of the properties, both shout out to Marriott and Hilton, for having apps where you actually can make requests via the app, which is, again, that is a great accommodation because you can request extra towels or, I don't know, extra soaps or whatever you need through that app and they can bring it through you that way. Have you been able to take advantage of that and even order room service from it?
Yes, I was able to do exactly that. It was great. I was able to request the towel. I was able to open up the app and, you know, they said, we're busy right now. We will get to you soon. And that was like, great, but I need to get in the shower. You know, and then I had to figure out how I could place the phone call to them. Yes, there are reasonable accommodations, quote unquote. But that still doesn't mean fully accessible.
Agreed, 100%. Let's move on. You mentioned the Air Carriers Access Act, and I'm so glad you did. Would you agree with me that most disabled people really don't have any idea about the Air Carriers Access Act?
This is completely valid. Where I see some of the issues that are easy changes that can be implemented. Obviously, there are architectural barriers that may need to be removed, that could cost money, that could take time. But some easy fixes are information for people with disabilities or just travelers in general. There are a lot of websites that have information for travelers. What I see is if you click on the accessibility tab, it just gives you information on how to contact someone if the website is not accessible. Or even the bottom disclaimer just talks about website accessibility, but they already have a tab. They already have a web page that they can put this information on. With the Air Carrier Access Act specifically, most people, I would assume, I probably shouldn't assume, I'm an attorney, I shouldn't give answers like that. Many people do not know about it. If you are not aware, the Air Carrier Access Act is the anti-discrimination in air travel against people with disabilities. It actually was passed before the ADA. This act was passed in 1986. The ADA was 1990. What is not communicated, though, is that this law exists. At PVA, we work a lot on air travel, and some of that is just educating the public, letting people know airlines can't discriminate against you. The ADA does not apply to air travel, meaning the actual travel part. There could be application to airports, but not the flying experience.
People are always surprised when I say air travel is not governed by the ADA. They get this look on their face like, what are you talking about? But it is, and it governs any flight that takes off or lands on US soil.
Yes, and also not only providing the information, but information doesn't only need to be provided to the traveler, to the guest, but also to the staff.
Oh, 100%.
There are a lot of people here that want to promote accessibility. There are corporations that really do want to have the mentality of inclusion, but that doesn't trickle down to the people that are actually communicating and working with the customers, with the guests. And with that type of training, letting them know that these are things that we can do, that these are adjustments, modifications that we can make, and changing that mentality on the ground would be monumental.
Let me give you an example of the lack of information with air travel. As a manual wheelchair user, I am able, according to the Air Carriers Access Act, request for my chair to be stowed in the cabin. It can be stowed in 3 different ways. The first is the closet. The next time you board a plane, take a look at the label on the closet. It says for priority storage of wheelchair. It does not say for crew luggage. It says for priority storage of a wheelchair. So that's the first place that you can stow that luggage. And when I get to the airport, let me get through all 3 of those. So that's the first one. The next one is in the overhead bin. If it can fit in the overhead bin, it can go there. Actually, there are 4. If it can fit behind the seats in the last row, it can go there. And then finally, if the plane doesn't have a closet and there are 100 seats or more, and my chair can either fold or come apart to be more compact, it can be strapped into a row of seats. And that actually even includes bumping passengers. Am I correct?
Yes.
Guess how often I've ever been given those options by anybody from an airline staff? Come on, one guess, somebody. 0! You all win the prize of getting your wheelchair broken on your next flight because they don't know the law. It is often a fight. In my home airport now, they see me coming and they go, "Good morning, Mrs. Durso, we have the closet cleared out for you." But pretty much everywhere else, it takes some time. I have to pull up. They have threatened to kick me off the flight before. And because they perceive me as being argumentative or whatever. But that is my right to request that. It is my right to protect my chair. And if it seems harsh to think about bumping somebody from the flight, think about this. When United Airlines finally broke my chair enough that I needed a new one, that was in May. I did not get my replacement custom chair until December 23rd last year. So yes, they replace it. Yes, they fix it. And even when it's just a fix, it can take 3 months. So I can inconvenience a couple people for less than a day, or I can be without my mobility for upwards of 6 months. One of them wins, and it's not the people who would have been in that seat instead of my chair. So let's keep going. That kind of covers a bit of it. What is another one that you've made that may be surprising to a business? What kind of accommodations have you asked for that may have come as a surprise to the business? And John, I learned something on your website about hotels that have a courtesy airport shuttle.
Yeah, you were trying to ask me about that before, and I forgot.
Now I got more
about it.
specific.
So the ADA requires businesses that are not primarily engaged in the business of transportation to provide accessible shuttle service if they provide shuttle service. So, some things you might be familiar with are airport hotels with shuttles, or, even bars in your local community that offer to drive fans to the game. I live in a baseball town, and there are all sorts of bars downtown that say, "Come here to drink before the game, and we will drive you to the stadium." The bar is not a transportation business. The hotel is not a transportation business. Those shuttles are either supposed to be wheelchair accessible from the start, like with a wheelchair accessible vehicle, or, and this is key because it's often misunderstood, they must provide an equivalent alternative. And equivalency, well, how do we understand equivalence? That is something that, it may not be the same vehicle, but the vehicle should, operate on the same schedule, be available at the same times, have the equivalent response time, have equivalent features. So if the hotel shuttle has air conditioning, my wheelchair accessible alternative better have air conditioning.
So this is another one not mentioned, wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, the problem is that, if 80% of roll-in showers are non-compliant, 95% of shuttles are not accessible.
Really, you think it's that low? I think it's like 99.99999.
I've slept in some airports because I got in on a late flight, no wheelchair taxi, and no hotels had an accessible shuttle or an alternative. It's a mess. I am happy to say DOJ is looking at this very closely right now. Part of that is just because too many people, I think, have been inconvenienced and stuck overnight at hotels or missed their flights as a result. And that has a very real impact. Is it, it's sort of one of these examples where, is it a reasonable accommodation? Well, no, it's supposed to be a built-in,
Yes.
Accessibility feature. And so oftentimes I find that we are discussing accommodations for things that should never be in the first place.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
But I have hope. There are some hotels that have accessible shuttles. I was very excited recently. I used to live in Orlando, and there are a lot of wheelchair taxis in Orlando. The problem is they all shut down at basically 11 o'clock. So drivers take their vans home, and you can't get a taxi after that time. And so occasionally I'd say, all right, well, I'm getting in on a late flight. I don't have a ride back to my apartment. I'll get a hotel. For the first time, I think late last year, a hotel at the Orlando airport finally got a wheelchair accessible shuttle. And there are like 30, 40, 50 hotels around MCO. And so for the first time, there's one hotel out of 50 or whatever that are compliant, and so that's exciting. It's the Hyatt place, by the way.
I was about to ask.
You're looking.
Good thing to know. So hats off to the Hyatt place in Orlando for having that. Now, you can absolutely, and we do this all the time, you call the hotel, and this would be good for you to practice with your partners, to talk to your hoteliers and let them know when somebody calls to ask if they have an accessible shuttle with their complimentary airport transportation. Tell them they should be saying, no, we don't. However, we will arrange a wheelchair accessible shuttle for you because that's the law.
And if there are any hotels in here, make sure you actually have a plan for that, because if it's 11:30 at night and you're cold calling taxi companies for a wheelchair van, that's not going to happen, I promise you.
Absolutely. So, what is an area that you have struggled to get a reasonable accommodation in? Not just because this does apply to more than just our basic human rights of sleeping in a bed, getting to and from the airport. That may not be a basic human right, but I feel like sleeping in a bed is. But let's go beyond that to doing activities and being part of the community. What are some reasonable accommodations that you've asked for?
Well, I travel quite a bit. And it's funny because listening to your story, sometimes I'll get into the airport at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm looking at the signs, I'm trying to figure out where are the shuttles, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and no shuttle shows up. And so I can see the airport phone there, and it says, use this to call for a shuttle. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make that work. So now I've got to try and find somebody. I go to the front desk and I say, hi, do you mind making this phone call for me? And then they all get confused. Well, I don't know. How am I supposed to call this shuttle company? Who am I calling? So then I have to try and find an Uber, and then I end up paying $50 for my Uber instead of getting the free shuttle. I just wish that there was a way for me to be able to call the hotel that was much easier.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I guess I'm a little bit more naive than I realized. I would have thought that there would have been something there for deaf, hard of hearing with the phones. I know some phones have something to adapt them, and we don't have that at the airports, apparently.
The TTY is becoming much more obsolete these days. I haven't used one myself in over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I just wish. Yeah, it's, really, long story short, the TTY has really changed to video relay service, which is where you can connect with an interpreter and make your phone calls. And so what we do is we do the direct video. So you have access using sign language immediately. And then that way you're able to contact the hotel.
So,
And we would be able to set this up right next to the actual phone that you can call. So what would happen, you would have a QR code. The deaf person would hold up their phone and would automatically connect with our company. Then we would be able to contact the hotel and get the shuttle. And so everything would work out very smoothly. So we're trying to grow this program. So that's what my company is trying to do, because of course we have all the solutions for all your needs. If you have any questions, please do contact us. 360 Direct Video.
I love it. So
Take
the
any of the
airports-
advertising.
The airports need to get out of the dark ages with their 80s phone that should have the TTY and upgrade to have a system like yours where we can make those calls much more efficiently. John?
So, Kristy, we're kind of in, I know this has been stressful and a lot of bad news here about all the things that are going wrong, but I want to share some good news and an exciting accommodation.
Oh, absolutely. Let's.
I love thrills. I like to get my heart pumping, and one thing that does that for me are zip lines.
Yes.
And there's one in Las Vegas that I've ridden a few times now. It's called Slotzilla. It's in downtown Las Vegas over Fremont Street. And an accommodation that I needed in order to take full advantage of that was, well, I roll my wheelchair up to the zip line and I get attached to it. But if I go down the line and my wheelchair, is behind me, I'm not going to have any way to get around on the other end. And so there were a couple of accommodations that we tried there. One was they pushed my wheelchair over to me on the other end. And another was they collected me with a chair of their own and took me back to collect my wheelchair. And that was an accommodation that had very minimal cost, employees 10 or 15 minutes of time, to make that experience and that thrill possible for me. And it's something that I had to request, but that's sensible.
But they did it.
And a great example, I think,
Yeah.
of how something that we may not consider, we're met with a request from a customer, and then we respond to that, and hopefully in a positive way.
I absolutely love that. That's a great example. So out of the U.S., I've had a similar, I got to do a zip line in Roatan, and their accommodation was a little bit different because it was all stairs. So when I said I wanted to go zip lining, I had another wheelchair user with me. We were doing an excursion, and they sent these two huge guys down the path, and they came over and said, "Do you want to go zip lining?" We looked at each other like, "Yes, we really do." And they said, "Okay, climb on." And we got on their backs, and they carried us up to the platform. And then two other normal-sized people came behind carrying chairs up behind us and put us in the chairs, got us all set. We'd go down first one person would go down with a chair, then one wheelchair user, and then the next chair, and then the next wheelchair user. So they brought the chairs to each platform for us on 11 different platforms. So we did 11 platforms of a zip line, all with them carrying all the equipment to make it possible and giving us piggyback rides every time there were stairs. Now, that's not something we would probably get to do here in the U.S., but what I loved about that experience was that it was authentic and real in that area, and they said yes.
Can I add one
Yes.
more anecdote story. Our members have paralysis, which means they can develop pressure sores. They don't have the same muscle structure. We were contacted Disney World because our members can ride the amusement park rides if they have a custom seat cushion. Disney World staff was saying, no, you can't use your seat cushion, which means they can't ride the rides that would have any type of hard seating. We contacted Disney World and requested that they allow seat cushions on their ride. Going back to what John said, if they have this mentality and are willing to listen and have an opportunity for guests to make those requests, once we talked to Disney World, they went then and surveyed every single ride that they could accommodate seat cushions on. They now have an entire list of all the rides. If you go to their accessibility page for guests with mobility disabilities, there's a little tab that says seat cushions that has the list, and it just came from listening. You need to create an atmosphere that people can make these requests and also a mentality of how can we accommodate them.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a wonderful thought to end on. Listen, then accommodate. Find a way to make the accommodation. Thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful panel for being up here. It was a lot of fun. We had some laughs. We shared some good, some bad, and hopefully you all learned a little something.